So I'm really pleased to introduce our next facilitator, Ann Phibbs. Ann brings over 25 years of experience helping organizations advance their diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. We've heard already how important those goals are within MCH. With extensive experience in training, teaching, curriculum development, and training corporate, government, higher education, nonprofit, healthcare, small businesses, and faith community settings, and has built a successful diversity inclusion leadership program at the University of Minnesota with a focus on emotional intelligence, EI, where she is an EI practitioner certified in the EQI 2.0 and EQ 360 methods. Please join me in welcoming Ann. We're really in for a treat.
Hi, everyone. Greetings from Minnesota. I'm excited to be here with you today. Thanks, Meg, for inviting me. In just a moment, I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint and lead you through a 90-minute session where there'll be some video, you'll hear me talking, there'll also be opportunities for you to do some small group work. But I just want to kind of frame why I think it's so important that we continue to do the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm sure you're all committed to that, but also why we really need to think about tools that will help us do that work. And I think emotional intelligence is one of those tools. So I'm here in Minneapolis. I live off of Lake Street, not far from where the 3rd precinct burned after the murder of George Floyd, and watching my city kind of have this huge upheaval around racial injustice. And now we're watching the trial. Literally can turn on the TV and kind of relive the horrific trauma of racism and what it's done to our country and to our communities. And as a white person, to people I care about and to people I don't know, to colleagues who are Black, Indigenous, people of color. And so this past year was kind of the year, I call it the year of the statement. I, as a DEI practitioner, got a lot of people reaching out. Can you help us? We want to craft a statement. We want to say something, which I think is a really good first step. There was plenty of racism, unfortunately, far before George Floyd was murdered, but that kind of was a catalyst, especially for a lot of white people. And that's a good thing. Anything that gets us, especially people with privilege, starting to pay attention to this. I'm hoping this year becomes the year of accountability, that as we had the year of the statement and people kind of saying we need to start paying attention, that now we really have people starting to say, what are we going to do? How will we show up in our workplaces, in our schools, in our universities, in our healthcare systems to actually move the work forward? And then to be prepared for pushback, because when you're trying to change oppressive systems, I always say it's not if there'll be pushback, it's when and how. What will it look like? And that's why I think emotional intelligence is so important. We need to train ourselves more and more as practitioners around diversity, equity, and inclusion. People, whatever social identities, whatever our lived experience, whatever role we have in an organization, someone who can come forward and say, I'm going to keep bringing this up. I'm going to talk about us being an actively anti-racist organization. We're going to challenge sexism and ableism, et cetera. Classism, homophobia, bi-transphobia. So that's just a little intro from me. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up my PowerPoint and jump right into my content. Apologies. I'm just, let me just see if that worked. Okay, you can see my PowerPoint, yes?
Yes.
All right, great, thank you. Just it asked me to do it in a different way I've ever done before. So of course that throws me. So I'm calling this Building Our Skills as Allies and Advocates Using Emotional Intelligence in Our DEI Work. And what we're gonna do is I'm just gonna do a couple quick slides that it just kind of frame why I think, again, emotional intelligence is connecting to DEI work. And then I'm gonna do a probably about 10-minute or so overview of emotional intelligence. I have a couple short videos that I'll share. I'll talk a little bit about that method that Meg mentioned, the 2.0 EQI 2.0 model. It doesn't really matter what the model is, but it's a model I was trained on. And then I'm going to put you in your first group to think about emotional intelligence in your own life. I'll come out, pull out from that. Apologies, I work in my basement. So my wife and daughter, 6-year-old, are home. So with 2 puppies. So if you hear things, you'll know why. I'm going to share some tips, put you back in a group for a scenario, and then wrap up with some next steps. So just a slide that lets us know that, as I mentioned, this work is challenging. It's not, if, but when and how the pushback will show up. And there are just particular challenges, I think, that can then show up when we're really trying to move diversity, equity, and inclusion forward. So it might be that we don't know all the topics. So it might be that we're new to talking about racial equity. It might be that we're seeing a lot more people who identify as non-binary or transgender. We're seeing a lot more folks kind of come out, especially at an early age. We see what's happening in Arkansas with the override of the governor's veto, unfortunately, with a horrifically transphobic bill in that state. So it might be that I was just doing a training yesterday where there was a man, relatively young guy, and he said, you know, this is still kind of new to me, understanding this gender identity stuff. So that can be a challenge. A situation can be a challenge, like a particular department or a particular unit that you work with, interpersonal dynamics, a particular person you work with, the structural barriers, the fact that all of our institutions are built on a structure of a kind of a foundation of racism and sexism and classism. And so there are things built into our systems that might be challenging to change. And then expectations, right? So once you are identified by other people and by yourself as someone who wants to move these efforts forward, there becomes this expectation, great, you know, this is all the work that we need to do, and it can be overwhelming and it can create burnout. So those are some things to think about why I think emotional intelligence might be able to help. So again, some connections between emotional intelligence and DEI leadership. I think this work requires emotional risk and vulnerability. When we address issues of racism, sexism, ableism, et cetera, we risk conflict, rejection, discomfort, and silence in our interpersonal relationships, not just at home, not just in our neighborhoods, not just in our sports teams or schools, but also in the workplace. When we address race and racism and other types of oppression, we must address privilege. You can't really do it any other way. And acknowledging our privilege can bring shame, which prevents connection. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, actually tomorrow, when I talk about accountability a little bit in a deeper way and how it's connected to shame. So just acknowledging privilege can be a challenge emotionally, and emotional intelligence can help. This is lifelong challenging work. We're not going to turn organizations or institutions around in 1 year or 5 years. It really is lifelong. And so we need to be optimistic, even in the midst of knowing historically, for example, racism is alive and well and built into our systems. We need to tolerate stress. We need to be flexible. These are key emotional intelligence traits. I'll mention them in the next few slides. We can't effectively work on issues of DEI unless we understand and value our own emotions, allowing us to understand and value others' emotions, right? So this work at its core, diversity, equity, inclusion, is relational. It's also intellectual. We need to know certain things. We need to know history and context. We need to know public policy and laws, et cetera. But at the end of the day, it's about conversations. It's about moving systems, moving people, and the kind of the people who create the systems in their understanding of oppression and power and being an ally. And so because it's relational work, it requires both self-awareness and empathy. And finally, we can develop our emotional intelligence and our leadership skills around DEI. EQ is not like other things like IQ, intellectual quotient, which is fraught for many, many different reasons around class and race, and is supposedly set. EQ is not set. Our emotional intelligence is something that we can continue to grow and build. So one more slide about thoughts before I kind of jump into what EQ is. I think particularly in what we have lived through in the last year, and not just the pandemic, but also what the New York Times argued is the single largest social movement in the history of our country, the uprising around George Floyd's murder and race and racism, and just also thinking about the anti-Asian and Asian American violence that we've seen. 3,800 people reporting incidents of anti-Asian violence, 68% of those toward women who are Asian or Asian American. Like we are living in a lot, right? And this pandemic and all the racial and class, et cetera, implications of that. So if there's one thing most of us share right now, and think about it, even as we come to the end, maybe, hopefully, knock wood, of this pandemic, and we're see the light at the end of the tunnel, Dr. Fauci's out there telling us, as is the head of the CDC, we're also looking at a new surge. So we really still don't know what this means for us in terms of also those of us who have children or young adults who can't be vaccinated yet. So if there is one thing most of us share, it's an increased lack of control. To differing degrees, we've lost control of our movement, our health, our access to things we care about, right? And even in access to understanding of our own future. We think we can travel this summer, but then again, what about small children or bigger children? Emotional intelligence, one of the things I like about thinking about it with this pandemic, it reminds us that we've only ever had control over how we perceive the world around us and how we react to that world. Take that in. It's a pretty simple sentence, and yet many of us don't remember this all the time, that we really only have control over how we perceive the world and how we react to it. So our sense that we can actually control the people and events around us is a myth that does not serve us well in good times, and certainly not in times like these. We can use emotional intelligence to pay attention to our needs and the needs of others, making decisions that reflect our core values. So just because I'm saying we can't control things doesn't mean we shouldn't try to organize and shape things, but it also reminds us that that we can create boundaries and stay kind of safe and healthy and sane in this work as much as possible. So this is just a slide that kind of reminds us what it looks like when we work with someone who doesn't have emotional intelligence. Have you ever met someone who was interesting but didn't know when to stop talking, never had asked you a single question? Worked with someone whose anger was always so close to the surface you worried they might go off at any minute? Been around someone who seemed to have very low self-esteem, such that they never stood up for themselves? Worked with someone who took credit for others' work, never apologized even when wrong, acted like a bully? I was listening to Patricia's amazing slideshow and was so sad to think about the bullying statistics that we see in schools, and to know that that translates also into the workplace, that a significant number of people either experience or witness bullying in the workplace. It's a huge problem. Interacted with someone who made mountains out of molehills, panicked at the slightest problem, or had a negative attitude toward just about everything. Typically when I used to train in front of people, now it's pretty much virtual, but I used to say, raise your hand if you have ever worked with someone like this, and inevitably the room would be full of raised hands. And I'd say, what was it like? And people would say it was hard, it was horrible, right? And so sometimes we learn about what something is. I have a PhD in philosophy by, thinking about what it's not. And so these are people without emotional intelligence. And what I learned about emotional intelligence, especially coming from most of my background, my work history is in higher education, is that it's not enough to be right, and it's not enough to be smart, right? Because there's a lot of people in higher ed who think they're right and who are very smart. I say, if you cannot relate to people, if you cannot have strong emotional intelligence and relational skills, I don't care how right you are, how smart you are, you won't lead. And you certainly won't be able to do diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So emotional intelligence or emotional quotient, EQ, created by Salivoy and Mayer, these two researchers, popularized by Dan Goleman, who wrote a kind of well-known book. He's a New York Times science writer, and his book Emotional Intelligence was, on the bestseller list in 1995. So these two researchers define EQ as the ability to recognize, understand, and manage our own emotions, which actually sounds much easier than I think it is, and recognize, understand, and influence, not to be confused with not manipulate, but influence the emotion of others. Now, I like this little image, it's kind of simple, got these little circles around this brain. The top three circles are about how we understand ourselves, right? So let's take that green circle at the top. This is emotional self-awareness. And it's so tempting to go, isn't that self-evident? I mean, doesn't everyone just know what they're feeling? But in fact, being able to recognize and name, and I would argue, accept your own emotional, your own feelings is actually a skill. It's often a skill that either gets supported or sometimes repressed in childhood. So as an example, I'm someone who, I'll be like futzing around the house kind of rough, and my wife will come up and she'll say, you seem kind of angry. And I'll say, no, I'm just going to do more things. It doesn't help that she's a psychologist, so she's totally got my number. And what I realize is, don't worry, I'm not going to go too deep into this, but I grew up in a household where we didn't talk about anger. There just really wasn't a lot of opportunity to express anger. It wasn't something that was supported generally. So I learned to shove mine down. So but anger, if you think about it, is a hugely insightful and important, right? It's in anger is often the first place we go to when we realize we've been something is unjust, if you think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's important to pay attention to it. But and that's just one of many, many emotions that we may or may not be aware of. So that's a first step, is, do I even know what I'm feeling? Now I maybe identify it, right? Okay, now I know I'm mad at my colleague. Now I go over to that purple circle, self-regulation. Now I got to figure out what I'm going to do about it. Am I going to just, blast out at them and, yell at them? Or am I going to do what a lot of us do, which is ignore it or push it down? Or am I going to become passive aggressive? That's another good one, right? So there's many ways to express it once we know what it is. And some probably more better off for our relationships than others. And then that right circle that's red, motivation. Do I understand what matters to me? Do I understand my values? Do I care enough about what's important to me that I'm going to be motivated to achieve goals, to set and achieve goals, right? And we've all met people who are kind of bitter because they never achieved certain things and they never really found that kind of agency they were hoping for. So this is an important emotional skill. The bottom two circles, of course, are now how we relate to other people. So orange is social skills, blue is empathy, and these are important parts of emotional intelligence. I like the work of Brene Brown. I think that she has a lot to share around, in particular, the value of vulnerability. In these two clips I'm going to show, I don't know what the Royal Society for the Encouragement of blah, blah, blah is, but I do know that they take audio clips and they animate them. So these are two short audio clips where Brene Brown is talking about two key concepts in emotional intelligence, the notion of empathy. She's going to talk about why empathy is so different from sympathy. And then she's also going to talk about blame and how blame is really corrosive. And so I think not only are these kind of interesting because they've been animated, but I think they illustrate two key ideas in emotional intelligence. So I'm going to go ahead, share my screen, or change my screen, I should say. And if for any reason someone cannot hear this video, please unmute yourself and let me know. But I'm just going to play them one right after the other.
We cannot hear it. And there's no sound.
Oh, sorry, there's no sound?
No.
That is very odd.
So when you go to share it, there's on the far left side, a share audio button.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Okay. Yeah, I think I know what went wrong. Give me 1 minute. Yeah, usually I'm able to click on those two share sound. Oh, there we go. Oh, hold on a minute. Let's try this.
Sympathy is,
Ooh.
Did you hear it?
We heard it. Yep. You're good.
Okay, now I got to back it up. Give me a minute to back it up. Okay, thank you for the patience. There we go.
So what is empathy and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. I had it, yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So I'm going to share my next video.
How many of you are blamers? How many of you, when something goes wrong, the first thing you want to know is whose fault it is? Hi, my name is Brene. I am a blamer. Let me just tell you this quick story. So this is a couple years ago when I first realized the magnitude to which I blame. I'm in my house. I have on white slacks and a pink sweater set, and I'm drinking a cup of coffee in my kitchen. It's a full cup of coffee. I drop it on the tile floor. It goes into a million pieces, splashes up all over me. And the first, a millisecond after it hit the floor, right out of my mouth is this: damn you, Steve. Who is my husband? Because let me tell you how fast this works for me. So Steve plays water polo with a group of friends. And the night before, he went to go play water polo. And I said, hey, make sure you come back at 10, because I can never fall asleep until you're home. And he got back like at 10:30. And so I went to bed a little bit later than I thought. Ergo, my second cup of coffee that I probably would not be having had he come home when we discussed. Therefore, and so the rest of that story is I'm cleaning up the kitchen. Steve calls, caller ID. I'm like, hey. He's like, hey, what's going on, babe? What's going on? So I'll tell you exactly what's going on. I'm cleaning up the coffee that spilled all, like dial tone. Because he knows. How many of you go to that place when something bad happens, the first thing you want to know is whose fault is it? I'd rather it be my fault than no one's fault. Because why? Why? Because it gives us some semblance of control. But here, if you enjoy blaming, this is where you should stick your fingers in your ear and do the na-na-na-na thing, because I'm getting ready to ruin it for you. Because here's what we know from the research. Blame is simply the discharging of discomfort and pain. It has an inverse relationship with accountability. Accountability, by definition, is a vulnerable process. It means me calling you and saying, hey, my feelings were really hurt about this, and talking. It's not blaming. Blaming is simply a way that we discharge anger. People who blame a lot seldom have the tenacity and grit to actually hold people accountable, because we expend all of our energy raging for 15 seconds and figuring out whose fault something is. And blaming is very corrosive in relationships, and it's one of the reasons we miss our opportunities for empathy. Because when something happens and we're hearing a story, we're not really listening. We're in the place where I was, making the connections as quickly as we can about whose fault something was.
So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. I find those really clever, how they animated those clips. And of course, they're kind of cute with the damn you, Steve. But I think they are illustrative of some key concepts in emotional intelligence. Don't look too closely at this because I'm about to show you a different image, but this is the model that I was trained on, the EQI 2.0 model, and this is another way to look at it. And so it takes each of these ideas, similar to those circles that were, around the brain, and kind of drills down deeper into them. And so, and one of the things about emotional intelligence that's important, not just that it can be developed, but also that it's about balance. The idea is not to be high in everything, because we're not going to be high in everything, but to balance and to also recognize, where might we be kind of easily and naturally strong, and where are places we can develop. So we start with self-perception, right? Again, that idea of emotional self-awareness. Do I actually know how I feel? But also, do I care about how I feel? That's self-regard, right? This is the person who's like, oh, and I've met them, I've had them in my family, the people who are full of obligation, right? But also seething with resentment because they're doing things they don't really want to be doing. So they're saying yes when they really should be setting a boundary, right? Do you have self-regard, and do you have self-actualization? Do you set goals? Do you follow through on those goals? Do you know what's important to you? And and especially for women, for a lot of times, white women, women of color, people of color, Native folks, people who have had marginalized identities, where in many ways for survival, kind of paying attention to people with more positional and social power, people with white people, etc. It's been tempting not to pay attention to what you need, but that's really important, especially to sustain yourself in any kind of work that you're doing. So that's self-perception. Then there's self-expression. So there's that emotional expression. Now I know I'm frustrated. I know I didn't really want to sign up to do this. I'm resentful. How can I express that, right? Can I be assertive? Can I be assertive even if everyone's saying one thing? Can I buck that trend and say, actually, I don't agree with this decision? And that's the independence piece. Can I think independently? Can I be assertive about my own needs, my own goals, my own values, and express them in ways that are appropriate? And let's remember that if we layer on DEI on top of emotional intelligence, how we understand emotional expression is very much baked into issues of oppression and power and privilege. For example, I, as a white person, am going to be able to express things like anger in a way that does not scare people, that does not threaten them. And that is not true for many people of color, especially think about Black people, think about the stereotype of the angry Black women. I've talked to so many Black women who say, I always have to be really careful in the workplace about how angry I get because I see my white colleagues go off, it's not a problem, but it's going to be a problem if I do. And so that becomes really important to recognize that we have to always see this through a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens and continue to work, right? To make it so that everyone is able to express their emotions. Interpersonal, there's that piece about how we relate to other people. So interpersonal relationships, empathy, as we learned from Brene Brown, not the same thing as sympathy. And social responsibility. I bet, given that you all are involved in maternal and child health, that you care deeply about other people and their health, that if I were to do some kind of a assessment of you as a group, I would bet money that we'd be pretty high on this yellow track right here. But if we move over to decision-making and stress management, we don't always think about these things as being related to emotional intelligence, but of course they are, because how we make decisions, how we perceive the world, so reality testing, how we solve problems, how we control our impulses, right? I think about recently doing some work with some white people who are really white leaders who are really working on racial equity. And they got some feedback about some things that were frustrating for some colleagues of color. And they kind of immediately went to wanting to fix it, right? Which wasn't really what they needed to do in that moment. Eventually we would come around to what to do, but there was a little impulse control that was needed to just kind of sit with the feelings, to kind of feel it and pay attention to what was going on with their colleagues emotionally. And that's a skill. That's an important skill in DEI work. Finally, stress management. And is there anything we've needed more in this pandemic? To be flexible, to tolerate stress. And here's the kind of almost kind of ironic thing about optimism. On the one hand, when you look at how much racism still exists, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, the incredible economic inequity that profoundly impacts things like maternal and child health, it is so tempting not to be optimistic, right? And yet at the same time, if we want to move efforts forward, it doesn't work to say, hey, everyone, I don't think we're going to change anything, but follow me. It's not going to happen. You have to have a certain amount of optimism. And so all of these are things that we can pay attention to and develop. And so as I'm going to put you into small groups, this is your first small group discussion, and just ask you to have a conversation. Obviously take off, unmute yourself, turn on your cameras if you're willing to, because I think that would be great, and just chat with each other about this. So consider those domains, self-perception, self-expression, interpersonal decision-making, and stress management. And then talk about this. Which domains do you think are well developed for you? And how can you tell? Which domains could use more development and how can you tell? And a really great question to ask yourself is, have you ever gotten feedback, positive or negative, about any of these domains? So when someone says, you know, you're a really great listener, or I can't always tell how you're feeling, or, you know, I sometimes feel like you just go to, you go to the negative right away. I can tell you quickly that I was, you know, we have to do, when you get trained on this model, you have to go through your own assessment. So I had this person who does this all the time do my assessment, and I came really low, if I go back, on this reality testing, because I'm that person who always said to my staff, hey, we can do it. Let's build this. Let's build this. I was very visionary, right? But they'd say to me, and we don't have the resources. You're burning us out, right? And of course I connected it back to my childhood, but don't worry, I won't go there. Often the things that we need to work on are things we've needed to work on our whole lives. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share and let me share this. I'm going to put into the chat.
And I made a Google Doc with the
Oh,
questions. Yeah.
thank you. Thank you so much. So you have that document, and it also has those, I know you're going to need to look at that model. So I'm going to go ahead and put you into groups. Just give me 1 minute to do that.
How much time will you give us, Anne?
I am going to give you about 12 minutes to have this conversation. There'll be a little timer, and then I'll give you a 2-minute warning when there's 2 minutes left. So go ahead and open up the rooms and you can talk about emotional intelligence.
Hi all, if you haven't moved to a room yet, please be sure to go to your breakout room. This is an interactive session.
Meg, if you want to join a room, I can stay and watch the waiting room, or any questions. Up to you. Hi, everybody. If you missed the invitation for the breakout rooms, you can click on in the bottom bar next to reactions, those 3 dots that say more. You can click on that and it should say join breakout room for the group that you were assigned. Thank you, Elisa. I see your question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the situation is with calling from a cell phone.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've done it twice now and it just drops me right off. And it did it at another conference too as well. So I apologize.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
that's
really
happening to
fine.
you.
All
Yeah,
right.
I'm sorry. I didn't know that happened with phone access. That's too bad.
Neither did I, actually.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know what happened. So it's just just an odd thing, I think, with my phone. I think it's a problem. Sometimes I know other people with iPhones have had this problem too as well. So I apologize, but I am loving your presentation, Anne,
Oh,
and this
thank-
entire conference. So I am not participating. I just don't want to
No, I get it.
drop off. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I understand. Thanks for letting us know.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you.
And I am still moving some people around because there's some people who are in a room by themselves, unfortunately, because people didn't go into the room. So I'm just busy moving people into rooms where there are actual people they can talk to.
For anybody that's just joining, we are finishing up with breakout sessions, so we'll come back to this main room here in a minute or two.
Welcome back, everyone, as you come zooming back into the room. As you probably know, Zoom gives us, I think, up to a minute to get everyone back in. So while everyone's zooming back in, I'm going to go ahead and pull my PowerPoint back up. And we'll just give it a minute to get everyone back in here. Welcome back to everyone who's zooming back in. Zoom gives you up to a minute to get everyone back in from small groups. So we're almost got just about everyone. And I hope everyone had good conversations. Because of time, don't really have time to go into what you talked about. But I will say that I often hear from people when I do have the opportunity to pull out, that people say, we talked about how sometimes emotional intelligence looks different depending on your role, like how you kind of deal with emotional intelligence, or what strengths you might have might look different depending on whether you're in your house with your family or at work. And I think that makes a lot of sense, that there's can be a difference based on context. But I think it's still just really helpful to be thinking about whatever the context. It might be, how do I show up with my friends and family? How do I show up at work? How do I show up in my neighborhood group or other organizations that I'm involved in, professional organizations, for example? So just that awareness, that self-awareness, and that again, notion that I can use these skills to develop as a leader, as a clinician, as a faculty member, as a graduate student, as a whatever it is you do out in the world, as a parent, for sure. And apologies if anybody felt a little moved around, because there's so many people on the Zoom call and some people didn't go into small groups. I moved you around a little bit, so I hope that wasn't too challenging. I want to, as I move toward having an opportunity for you to think in a particular scenario, how might I use emotional intelligence skills to show up? I just want to share some tips for applying it. And these are, these are specifically in the workplace. So in every part of your work and in all your interactions, pay attention to your emotional reactions as much as possible. It won't be possible to always do this, but this is a skill you can develop. And remember that emotional reactions are not just about big emotions like anger. We kind of go to anger and fear, happiness, sadness, but we feel many things in subtle and nuanced ways. So notice when you're feeling disconnected, bored, or I think I said discontented, but you could also feel disconnected, bored, happy, resentful, playful, ashamed, anxious, competitive, joyful, jealous, or sad. All of those things are emotions. They're all important to pay attention to. I mean, let's take an example like both anxious and competitive, right? That when we might start to notice we're feeling competitive and it's getting in the way of our being able to work with a particular group of colleagues or a particular colleague Or maybe we're feeling anxious. Do I really fit in? Am I going to be seen as smart? You know, what's my role, right? And how is that playing out? A first step in developing your emotional intelligence is to recognize and acknowledge your feelings. Once you've acknowledged your feelings, you can work to manage them, not deny them, not dismiss them, but manage them. We've been taught that emotions need to be contained, denied, or dismissed, and people have been marginalized through emotional stereotypes, as I mentioned. These ideas are wrong and hurtful. Emotions are central to being human and give us useful information we need to take care of ourselves and be in relationship with others. You can probably all imagine a time when you push something aside that you probably shouldn't have pushed aside, right? That you were feeling something that was telling you maybe something wasn't okay. And that really, when you look back on it, you realize I should have paid attention to that. Emotions give us really important information. Managing our emotions will look different for each of us. We may need time alone. I'm married to an introvert, trust me. And you can imagine, I love to train, I'm an extrovert. I process the world verbally, which can be challenging for her sometimes, but she's very kind about it. But sometimes she just needs to be like, she'll just say, I gotta have some space where I'm not talking to or listening to anyone. That's just who she is, right? We may need time to process with a trusted colleague, friend, or therapist. We may need to vent or cry. We may need to step back from a particular meeting or project. And think about when someone shows really intense emotion, how we manage that, you know, and that sometimes we get scared of it when in fact it's important to recognize it and pay attention to it. It's in our workplace. Of course, emotions are in our workplace. So managing our emotions is appropriate when we are open and honest about what we're feeling, when we express those feelings in ways that are respectful to others and not manipulative. And, you know, when a person of color, for example, shares some lived experience of racism and how hard it is. And many people of color even make jokes about this. Often a white woman in the room will start to cry. There's nothing wrong with white people feeling the effects like, oh my gosh, there's so much racism and I was never taught about it. And what does it mean for me? Hey, go ahead and cry. But when you cry in that moment, when your colleague of color just shared and suddenly everyone's trying to take care of you as the white person, that's a problematic dynamic, right? That's manipulative. It might not be what you intended, but that's what will happen because we tend to take care of people with privilege and power. And when we hold ourselves accountable for our feelings. Work to build rapport and trust with your colleagues, students, those you supervise and mentor. Remember that members of marginalized communities have endured pain and trauma. It's understandable they may be cautious in relationships. Vulnerability and openness create trust, which builds deeper, more authentic relationships. One of my favorite things that I say that came from my wife, who's a therapist, is trust is built not in perfection, but in repair, which I think is really helpful, especially as those of us with privilege attempt to do. You know, if you are working with the LGBTQ community and you're straight and or cisgender, and you might make mistakes, you might misgender someone, you might do something, to realize that a community, an individual is not going to trust you because you're perfect, because no one is. They trust you that when you do make a mistake, you say, oh, I'm sorry, you apologize, you make amends, and then you say, I want to work to do better. I want to actually change my behavior. That's when I start to trust you. In repair, that's when we're repairing, not imperfection. So vulnerability and openness create trust, which builds deeper, more authentic relationships. It's in these deeper relationships where we can do better work. We can give people open and honest feedback and accept it ourselves. We can address hurtful, biased, and discriminatory behavior while staying connected, because that will happen. We will commit microaggressions. We will make biased decisions. It's human, it's built into us. It's how our brain works. That's what we know about implicit or unconscious bias. So pretending it's not there, pretending we shouldn't talk about things like race, which I hear from white people not infrequently. Well, the problem is we talk about it too much. Actually, no. The problem is white people haven't been taught to think about their own white privilege and to talk about it. But we can stay connected, even if we're disagreeing. We can be more playful and vulnerable and thus more innovative and creative. And finally, I think this is my last slide on this. When you are triggered by something that happens, and we all are, don't dismiss it or downplay it. Pay attention to what's happening to you emotionally and learn from it. What happens, for example, when you feel triggered, when a colleague keeps challenging you, the same one, right? Do you get angry? Do you feel resentful? Do you write them off? Now use that emotional and behavioral information to inform what actions you can take. This is leadership, right? Don't just be reactive, but actually say, okay, what am I feeling? Every time, Anne is in this committee with me, I just get all upset. What's going on? I'm going to slow down and pay attention, right? Oh, oh yes, and I feel competitive with Anne, or I feel resentful toward Anne because I feel like she never acknowledges my effort, whatever it is. Should I have a conversation? Should I share how I'm feeling? Should I talk with someone else? Remember that while you cannot control what others say or do, you can always control your own reaction and the meaning you make out of every interaction. Treat yourself and everyone with whom you respect, interact with compassion. Your goal should not be perfection, but authenticity, honesty, and connection. And model how to apologize if you make a mistake, and also how to move on, and be willing to accept apologies from others and move on, right? This is the blame is not gonna, it's very tempting, and it's very tempting to blame when we're talking about oppression, but it actually doesn't get us to where we wanna go. This is just I have 2 more slides before I put you in your small group for the scenario. And this is just a TED Talk I love from Brene Brown, The Power of Vulnerability. I like how she says, vulnerability without boundaries is not vulnerability. I think that's really, really important, that we still need those boundaries. But she talks about her research around people who are wholehearted, and found that wholehearted people share the courage to be imperfect. That's the vulnerability, right? Compassion towards themselves and others, which is really important now as we're also challenged. Connection, a willingness to be authentic and real and not perfect. And vulnerability, fully embracing our own and others' vulnerability. And so just think, questions to think about as you consider how to use emotional intelligence in your work and in your DEI efforts. Consider these traits. Do you think they're useful or necessary? Do they show up in your work? And if so, how? If not, why not? I sometimes say to people, do you show up vulnerable in your work? And what does that look like? And if that's even a hard question to ask yourself, that might be something to look at. Often, a lot of you are experts in the field of child and maternal health. And when we're experts, we get rewarded for that expertise, right? And it's really, we get rewarded for individualism and expertise. And I say the work of diversity, equity, inclusion is not about individualism and expertise. As a white person, you'll never be the lived experience. No, be an expert on the lived experience of racism and what it means to be Black, Indigenous, person of color. As someone who is white, is cisgender, is heterosexual, you'll never be an expert on the lived experience of LGBTQ people, but you might still need to talk about that, talk about those issues, engage with that community. So you've got to learn to do things you might never have been really rewarded for. A community focus, a collectivity, and also working from something you'll never be an expert on. This is just something I'm going to say very quickly, which is just because this is kind of focused on skill building. I love this exercise, and I stole it. You know, a lot of good trainers steal things from The Art of Hosting, or The Art of Participatory Leadership, a way of kind of hosting conversations. And it's just this really great way to listen for facts, feelings, and values. You put 4 people in a group. It takes 40 minutes, but and each person takes 10 minutes to do this one section. So somebody tells a story, person B listens just for the facts in the story, someone listens just for the feelings, someone listens for the values, and then they reflect that back to person A. And then you take turns so everyone has a chance to pay attention, to be in each role. And what you find is that listening is a skill, that we can be better listeners, most of us, and that we often pretty much tend to go in on facts, sometimes feelings, and that actually listening for values, what matters to them, what's really going on emotionally in this story, is actually a way to really connect and to build community. So just an example of a skill building exercise you could do, like at a staff meeting. So here is your scenario that I'm going to put you back into small groups and have you talk about. What would it be like to actually use emotional intelligence in this situation? So you're working with a small committee so if you're primarily an organization with like staff and administrators, but maybe you might be connected to, faculty and students. So you put your context in, but you're working with a small committee of staff and maybe some faculty or administrators on an established program. There's been some tension between one older white male faculty or administrator, Dr. Johnson, who holds quite a bit of institutional power, and a couple of the newer, younger staff. In this meeting, you're considering changing something central to the program, right? This is the work of DEI, to actually make change in order to bring in more insight and experience from those community members who identify as Black, Indigenous, and/or people of color. As you discuss the matter, Dr. Johnson says, while I support all our efforts at bringing in more diverse voices, I'm concerned that this increased focus on anti-racism in public health and healthcare in general is working against the kind of reasoned, critical approach we usually take. We are professionals who rely on science and data after all. I don't think we should be rushing to change a program that has been working well. This is pushback, And this is the way pushback sometimes looks, right? With the clause beforehand. Of course, I support diversity, but you notice the body language from some of the newer staff, and they seem visibly upset at this comment. When the committee chair asks if anyone has any additional comments, one of the new staff members says, kind of quietly, but loud enough for all to hear, "I can't believe it's 2021 and we're actually having this conversation, but I'm new here, so I suppose I've got to let it go." You notice Dr. Johnson looking at his phone and no one else says anything. So what might you do if you wanted to show up as an ally or advocate in this situation? How might emotional intelligence help you navigate it? How might your own role as a staff member, a graduate student, administrator, faculty member, whatever role you play in your organization, affect what you would do? And how might your own racial identity affect what you would do and how you might be perceived? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share. I'm going to go back to the breakout rooms. I'm going to recreate them a little bit. I'm trying to, here we go. I'm going to give you another 12 minutes to have that conversation, and I'll give you a 2-minute warning. So there you go.
And I don't know if you saw the question in the chat. Maybe when we come back, you could address that.
Yes, I did not. I typically like look
Yeah,
at the chat.
it's hard to, it's hard, I know.
Yeah, okay, good. I'll do that. And I
Yeah,
put
so-
people in, and I put people in larger groups so that the people who don't, there's still enough to talk.
Yeah.
Even if they don't. But yeah, I'll look at that right now. Thanks.
No, it's asking about resources to learn
Oh.
more about EQ.
Oh, cool.
And then the other, I mean, one of the things that my question is there a free assessment that you would recommend, or would you suggest that people go through the formal EQ 2.0?
Oh yeah. While they're doing that, no, I do have an article that I can reference that shows different online tool, like free assessments. So let me find that and I can share that.
So Allison's having trouble. Marissa, are you seeing this? Can you, I don't know if you can help with that.
Trouble getting in?
She says, okay. Some folks are getting dropped when they go
How to get, wait, let me see.
Sometimes people, so what I typically do is monitor this and help people kind of get back in. I've got one person that didn't get in.
Elisa, yeah, we can assign you. I'll just assign you to room 1 real quick.
Sure.
Actually, I think, Elisa, I think you're still on your phone though, right? Like we know that's a,
yeah, we know there's one.
That's a problem. That's a problem. If you're on your phone for some weird reason.
I already moved there. Sorry,
can't
guys.
add.
Yeah, I said not now. Thank you all.
Okay. So sorry, Elisa.
No worries. Thank you.
Did Allison make it in her room?
No, she popped back out. We'll try one more time to put her in group 1. Yeah, and then I've got some people that like.
Oh, room 16 is only.
Yeah, I'm putting her into room 17 right now. That's what I'm doing right now. She's the only one in there, Melissa. So I just moved her to room 17. So hopefully, yeah, she just got in her room. So I'm just going through all of them right now. Okay, I think every room has at least like 4 people in it now.
Oh, okay. We'll try to move you.
D. Murphy, what room were they in?
16, it looks. Oh, okay. So I'll move you to, I'm going to try to move you to 14.
Okay, and Julie just popped into 16, so I'm going to put her into 15.
Okay.
Okay. It's like musical rooms.
You're such a pro though, Anne.
Yeah, you do get used to it.
Is anybody playing Zoom bingo where like, you know, trying to move people into breakout rooms is one of the spots.
Think
Yeah,
of for being so patient and knowledgeable, and it's contagious how well you're managing this, because
oh,
I'm freaking out.
no. Yeah, no, thanks. No, that's one reason I made really big rooms. So it's funny because like we have one room that's really big, but I just knew there that I wanted to minimize the people with just one person. But I think now we've got just about 4 people in every room, which is good. Good. Meg, I won't do my last bit, but if I go to like 110, is that okay?
I mean, you can, I think you were scheduled to go to 11:15, right?
Oh, sorry. No, I had it that I went till 11, but
Oh,
maybe I
okay,
got,
so yes, 110 is great.
okay, all right, good.
That to make up for the 10 minutes that we lost.
Oh, great. I'm going to try to find those, that article about emotional intelligence. So, hi, Madison, I'm going to put you in a group. Looks like you just came in. I'm going to put you in group 4. Hi, Caridad. It looks like you just came in and we have about 30 seconds left of a small group. So I
Okay.
won't put you in, but we were talking about a scenario that is in the chat. So
Yeah, I was in it. All of a sudden, I just got kicked off. So
oh, you got kicked. Oh, sorry.
I had to reboot my computer and
Ugh,
let me back on.
yeah. Yeah, sorry about that.
It's
It
okay.
can get so kooky.
Thank you.
Sure. Welcome back, everyone. Give everyone a few minutes to get back in here. Not a few minutes, up to 30 seconds, 60 seconds. I hope you had good conversation. I think I'm going to remove the spotlight from me and put us back. I mean, so we can have just a larger view as we talk about the scenario. So we'll just wait for everyone to get back in. All right. I think we just got just about everybody coming back in. So, you know, part of emotional intelligence is kind of reading the room, figuring out what's going on, right? And what's very clear in the scenario is that you've got some younger staff. Welcome back. I think I started a little too soon. Sorry, I didn't. I'll hold off till I think everyone is back in. All right, I think that's everyone. So I was talking about reading the room, right? You've got this meeting and you clearly have some staff that you know are not okay with what Dr. Johnson said. Dr. Johnson's not necessarily paying attention. No one else is saying anything. And the chair is, you know, sometimes I say, we all want like the chair to do the right thing. We want a faculty member to do the right thing when they're teaching. We want our supervisor to do the right thing, but never count on that, right? Sometimes people in leadership positions don't do the right thing. And so that's what it means to be an ally or an advocate or a co-conspirator, whatever word we use to talk about, you know, bringing this lens, this diversity, equity, inclusion lens. So, so yeah, are there any other comments, right? I think is what I had the chair say, something like that. Yeah, any additional comments? And you notice no one says anything. What might it be like to address this? What did you talk about?
I think we had a pretty good discussion in our group. Destiny makes a very valid points. Like I said, of course, everybody can see that I'm African American, so it's kind of a touchy situation for me. So I would need time to process and think about what I would say or how I would react, because I don't want to make a scene. And that was some of the things that Destiny pointed out. You know, you have to decide, you know, am I going to make a scene? How will he receive this? So
Yeah.
my reasoning, like I said, I'm a social worker. So the word advocate means I need to stand up and I need to say something. But is this a conversation to have with him in the group setting or an individual conversation? So there were things that, I guess, thinking about the whole picture, again, it's a very sensitive subject for me, and I may have been that loud but quiet employee that expressed myself, but, you know, I don't want to make a scene either.
Right. Chiquita, did I say that? Got your name, I think. Thank you for starting us off. Yeah. And that's one thing to pay attention to, especially when you have privilege by virtue of your racial identity or gender or other identities, and when you have positional power, to recognize that there's power in every space. And when I have some of it, how can I use it, right? So for example, it's possible that someone this is Dr. Johnson. Dr. Johnson has some positional power. I wanted to weave that into the scenario. And yet it would be really great if someone would be willing to say, wait, I don't think we're all decided on this topic. Like, I think we need to revisit it. And if someone could actually reframe and say, well, I'm concerned about this increased focus on anti-racism is working against the kind of reasoned critical approach we usually take. Okay, so that could be, we could have a conversation about that, couldn't we? Right? Because I think there's a lot of research behind how racism has impacted public health and healthcare in general, and that this is not some fly-by-night kind of thing that's not steeped in research. That, this is like playing his game in some ways, right? But saying, no, actually, I think we, having an anti-racist approach makes a lot of sense, but let's talk about it more. What are people thinking? What are people feeling, right? Just because Dr. Johnson pushed in one way, and then recognizing everyone won't feel that they can speak up in the same way, right? Because it will be a risk for some people that it might not be for others. To Chiquita's point.
Yeah, well, as an older person on the staff, I would say to Mr. Johnson, maybe we should talk about this. I'd like to hear what Chiquita has to say.
Mm-hmm. Right. And maybe we could all just, thank you, Nancy. Yeah, maybe we could hear from people we haven't heard from yet. That's a great way to say it. I did that on a training, and the same white guy who runs the company, I was a small company, just started talking again. I was like, okay, so much for that trick. But I tried. I said, let's hear from people who haven't talked. And it didn't sink in.
This is that, but I think there was a button that was pushed. They were asking.
Other comments about this?
I'm concerned that, or is there someone else?
No, go ahead, Marina.
Yes, I'm concerned that if, let's say I spoke up and said, let's talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
We have others in the room that may feel the way he feels.
Yeah. Now I can't hear you, Marina, but I heard you say there. Marina, you cut out. There you go. No, that's okay.
I was saying if others in the room feel the same way he feels, even me saying, let's talk about it, would put me sometime at a disadvantage. Because now I feel like I'm defending who I am, and others will quietly sit there with the same thoughts that he may have. And I think we're going from the perspective that everybody may feel the opposite of him, but that's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
Being in our country, one person speaks up and others follow quietly, believing. So I don't know if that approach would always be effective, saying, let's talk about it, or say it and if no one else agrees. Do you just shut down, or how do you handle that situation?
I don't know how I got muted. Mute is so weird. I don't think I muted myself, but maybe I did. Anyway, thank you, Marina, for that. I think your point is very well taken. I think there is no reason to think you can't know what everyone's going to say. And so it is a risk. There's no question that when you're reframing something, when you see some pushback, and that's what I built into this scenario. This is pushback around anti-racism efforts, trying to change a program to include more voices from Black, Indigenous, people of color in a way to make your program more actively anti-racist. And then a white man with some positional power says, wait a minute, let's slow down. Let's not change our program. That's exactly what things look like. It's much less, sometimes you're gonna have someone who says, I don't support your anti-racist efforts, but awful lot of white people now are not going to say that publicly, but they will say things like, well, let's have a reasoned approach, or this is happening too fast, or why are we changing something that works, right? So I built it in, and there's no guarantee what anyone is going to say. And some people have more to lose and will be seen in certain ways. right? So when a person of color says, let's talk about this issue of race, we say they're playing the race card. I've never been accused of playing the race card. I have a racial identity that profoundly impacts how I move through the world, but I've never been accused of playing the race card.
Or Annie, I've been considered the angry Black woman.
Yeah, right.
For expressing what I feel in my opinion.
Exactly, exactly.
And then I feel like that's a place of power when people have done that to me, because then that shuts me down. And then no one wants to hear what I have to say, or you count it out what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I think that's unfortunate also.
Thank you, Marina. Absolutely. It's a complete way to silence people. So what we see is how critical it is that people, that as many people as possible take the risk and speak up, especially people who can afford it. So what do I mean by that? The white person in this room is not going to be accused of playing a race card or having a special agenda, right? I mean, I'll just tell a story. I'm in a small group, talking about to a nonprofit agency where they're talking about bringing me in to do some training. And there's a Black woman who had been the one to bring me in, and we're talking to a white administrator. And as we're walking out of the room, the Black woman turns to me and said, yeah, they could hear it from you, right? I mean, it was it's just like made me sad but I totally agreed with her. I mean, she said, she knows the context better than me. And she said, yeah, I've said the same thing you were saying in there, but they don't hear it from me, right? But they'll hear it from you because you're white. And I turned to her and I said, well, then it becomes really important that I'm saying the right thing, isn't it? Right? It becomes really important whether I want to or not, doesn't matter. If they're going to listen to me more, and that's how racism works, if they're going to listen to men more who talk about sexism, because that's how sexism works, better make sure that people with privilege are saying things the right way and trying to support colleagues as much as possible. Because those are real dynamics. And Marina just, was vulnerable enough to share her experience, Chiquita as well.
May I say something?
Please.
I think it's really important to be true to your humanity over your culture or your class. And if you can approach something from that perspective and educate people, focus on the commonalities, you'll find that when we look at our commonalities, we're no longer the minority. Because of our commonalities, we are the majority. So when you speak up, even though you feel like a minority, if you're speaking on humanity and common values, you're really part of the majority.
Thanks, Courtney. Yeah, it's a great point. And one thing we can do is say, this impacts everyone, and this impacts our work. If we don't change to fit a new idea of who we're serving, right? Our programs don't work in the same way that maybe when they started, right? So this kind of continual improvement, we're going to need to talk about it. And it might make some people uncomfortable. That's okay. I want to be respectful of time because you need a break, I'm sure. I want to share my last slide just to share it with you. And I really appreciate this conversation, especially in front of 150 people. That degree of vulnerability, I think it's a gift. So I see it that way. Here's just the last thing I'll leave you with. What can you do personally to develop your ability to move forward the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion? That should be inclusion. By managing conflict, having authentic conversations, building inclusive community, that's what we need to do. How can you hold yourself accountable for this work, especially when you have privilege? How can your workplace or department do to create the space for these conversations? And how can your workplace or department hold itself accountable? As I said, to kind of wrap up, to go back to what I said at the very beginning, that I hope this becomes the year and years of accountability where we say it's not enough to talk about it. We have to see concrete change to create more equity. And the very last thing I'll say before to just thank Meg for bringing me and for everyone to be here is that I know there were some people who were interested in some resources around emotional intelligence. There's an article that shares some online assessments you can do. I have a book that I'm going to recommend. So if that's okay, I'll send that to Meg, and that would be something that Meg can share, because I couldn't find the article during the session. I was looking, but I couldn't find it. So, and then Meg will also in some way, I think, share the PowerPoint that I sent out. So thanks everyone. I know you went from one session into another, so I appreciate your willingness to hang in there with me, and I hope you have a wonderful day.